MotoGP is the world's premier motorcycle road racing series. This means that it attracts the top talent in the world, and that's not just the riders. The manufacturers as well are competing to prove that their machines are the best of the best. Currently, there are 5 manufacturers on the grid in MotoGP. However, throughout history there have been many more. My goal is eventually to make a video covering every manufacturer from every class, and I sat down to do that. And then when it took me 3 hours just to write out the list that I'm pretty sure still isn't complete, I realized that I needed to tone it down a bit if I wanted to get it out in a reasonable time. Once I realized the monumental scope of that video, I realized I should probably make a more palatable version that was just the MotoGP manufacturers for the premier class in the modern era. So yes, this is just the top class, and just since 2002. My name is B, this is the Beehive Paddock, and this is every MotoGP manufacturer explained and ranked. If you're enjoying the video, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment to help push this out into the YouTube algorithm, and please remember that this list is just my opinion. For the most part, this list is based on just results. However, I also consider making your own parts to be better than outsourcing, and to a lesser degree I factored in technical innovations, the amount of time you fielded bikes in the championship for, and, in the few cases where it applies, extended periods of dominance. Number 30. ROC Yamaha. Coming in dead last, rating as the worst MotoGP manufacturer ever, is ROC Yamaha, and that's mostly because they never should have been racing here in the first place. Unfortunately, we're starting the list with a very confusing entry. There have been dozens of manufacturers which have aspired to make MotoGP machines throughout the years to varying degrees of success. ROC Yamaha was not one of them. In fact, they never made a MotoGP bike at all. The story of the ROC Yamaha begins with the death of a beloved Grand Prix machine, the Suzuki RG500. The cheap, affordable machine which any privateer could use to go racing at the highest level had been rendered obsolete by the early 90s, and the sport was suffering because of it. Allegedly at the behest of Kenny Roberts, Yamaha began making their engines available to European chassis makers. And the two most notable ones were Harris in the UK and ROC in France. So how did an early 90s 500cc two-stroke end up racing in MotoGP a decade later? Well, it all comes back to WCM, or World Championship Motorsports, which ironically enough was partnered with ROC's rival chassis maker Harris to create Harris WCM in 2003. The team had plans to create its own full prototype bike, but these plans severely underestimated the time needed to undertake such a monumental task, and as such, when the team showed up for the first Grand Prix of the season at Suzuka, their bike's engine featured modified castings from a Yamaha R1. Now, the subject of who actually raised red flags about this is up for debate. According to Peter Clifford, who was leading the project at the time, Dorna and all the other MotoGP teams were fine with it, and it has been alleged that World Superbike promoters may have been the ones to take issue and alert the FIM. Naturally, the FIM would never allow production engines to race in a prototype racing series, and so the team's bikes were banned until they could be called true prototypes. Well, WCM had contracts and sponsors that they had to satisfy, and 2 riders in the form of Chris Burns and Jose David de Gea to field, but they didn't have any bikes to field them with. So they found 2 old 500cc two-strokes that were generously middle of the road in their heyday, and fielded them against the RC211V, YZR-M1, and Ducati Desmosedici. One of these was a 1993 ROC Yamaha ridden by Chris Burns. Burns would enter 3 rounds with the machine, only actually starting 2. His first ever MotoGP race would be at his home track in Donington Park, where he would fall victim to the 2-stroke power delivery and crash out on just the second lap. After withdrawing from Germany due to crashes prior to the race, he lined up in Brno. This was the final time a 500cc two-stroke ever raced in a Grand Prix. He even made it to lap 10 before retiring this time. ROC Yamaha never made a MotoGP bike. They made a bike that just happened to race in MotoGP 2 times, 10 years past its expiration date, and failed to see the finish line both times. Through no fault of their own, they come in last place. Number 29. Inmotec. Inmotec was a Spanish motorcycle company created by Oscar Gorria Soteras in order to design and field the first ever Spanish MotoGP bike. And it is yet another weird case where, despite its record, it really doesn't deserve to be last. The goal of the company was to create the first Spanish MotoGP bike, planned to run in 5 rounds of the 2010 season and the entirety of the 2011 season. The Inmotec GP10 was first presented in 2009, with testing done in 2010, but failed to actually make an appearance until 2012, when the BQR team used the bike in preseason testing and was the second fastest among all CRT entries. BQR would choose not to run the Inmotec bike, but would eventually use a carbon fiber chassis made by Inmotec in 2012. But that's a different story for later in the video, as that bike was ridden under the official name BQR. The actual Inmotec name would only be used once. Soteras used an internet crowdfunding project and raised enough money for Inmotec to wildcard at a single round, Valencia of 2012. Claudio Corti qualified 22nd of 22 riders on the grid and crashed out 17 laps into the race, with the bike racing under the name Inmotech never actually reaching the finish line in a Grand Prix. Despite only entering 1 round as opposed to 3, Inmotech rises above ROC Yamaha because at the very least it was a bike that was made for MotoGP. 28. Sabre. Some of you may have noticed that when I was talking about Chris Burns and the ROC Yamaha, I failed to mention his teammate. And that's because Jose David de Gea didn't actually ride an ROC Yamaha while he was waiting for WCM to cook up a prototype. Instead, he was given a Sabre V4 from the UK. Sabre Sports Limited was a small budget team who had fielded a 250cc team in 1999 and was invited to race in the Premier class in 2000. They initially campaigned a bike built around a Honda NSR 500 V-twin engine, but soon realized that they would need a V4 to keep up. So they got to work designing a chassis to build around a 1994 Yamaha YZF 500 engine. During the 2001 season, the bike shown as a top privateer option, but with the announcement of the MotoGP class replacing the 500s for 2002, the team would not return. However, their bike did make a return for 3 races in 2003 with David de Gea. He, like his teammate, entered 3 races and only started 2. In Great Britain, he did a little better than his teammate, retiring after completing a full 9 laps. But in Germany, he would make a breakthrough. After qualifying dead last in 25th, he would stay upright, finishing the race a lap down, dead last, but on 2 wheels, for a stunning best finish of 20th place. This is another bike that was never meant to run in MotoGP, but being only 2 years old despite the 9-year-old engine, it's a lot more forgivable. Plus, unlike the entries below it, it actually managed to finish a race. Huzzah. Number 27. SNB Suter. Former racer and Swiss chassis maker Eskil Suter formed Suter Racing Technologies, or SRT, in 1996, and has been involved in many motorcycle racing projects over the year. From the MUZ 500 to the Petronas Superbikes to being a formidable Moto2 constructor, and finally, when the CRT rules came into effect, a proper MotoGP constructor. With the switch to 1000cc machines and the option to make a hybrid prototype and production machine, Suter leapt at the opportunity to create a bike around the BMW S1000R platform. We'll talk about how that went later though, because this bike in particular was not a pure Suter creation. After Suter's inaugural campaign in 2012, they sold one bike to the Remus Racing Team, an Austrian-based squad who reworked the engine, transmission, and electronics, and managed to bring on Martin Bauer for 2 wildcard rides in 2013. Bauer would finish 21st in Brno and 20th in Valencia. Dead last finishes for each, but finishes nonetheless, putting him just a touch above the manufacturers we've discussed so far. Number 26. BCL Motorsports. With the advent of the CRT class in 2012, many new manufacturers got to try their hand at creating a halfway MotoGP machine, and as we've seen, some other manufacturers got the chance for a quick advertising campaign or just to say they did it for one race. One of the latter was a combination effort between American-based parts distributor GP Tech and Canadian-based BCL Motorsports, leading to the creation of the GP212, a GSXR engine wrapped in a bullet aluminum chassis. After some semi-promising tests that showed they could probably qualify for a race, they secured a wildcard entry for the Indianapolis Grand Prix in 2012, where the bike would be ridden by Aaron Yates, the superbike rider, not the rapper. While it was a joint effort, GP Tech took the team name and BCL Motorsports took the manufacturer name. In Indianapolis, Yates qualified last on the BCL machine and would finish last among those left standing. However, in a race of attrition, he was able to stay up, something 6 other riders couldn't do, and rode home to a 16th place, by far the best of any manufacturer so far. The bike would be given permission to wildcard at all 3 American rounds in 2013. Michael Barnes would ride the bike during the inaugural Grand Prix weekend at COTA, and was 3 seconds off the pace in FP4, failing to qualify for the event, and ending the tale of BCL and MotoGP, as the other wildcards for 2013 never ended up happening. Number 25. BQR FTR. Fabrication Techniques Racing Motorcycles was a British parts manufacturer specializing in race bike chassis. They would end up supplying frames for a number of different CRT and open class bikes during the 2010s, the least notable of which was the BQR FTR machine, by Carosa No Racing. You may remember them as the team which fielded the Inmotech chassis under their name. This is still not that bike. No, this was a bike powered by Kawasaki engines with an FTR chassis, which they ran only once during their first ever MotoGP race. Ridden by both Yanni Hernandez and Ivan Silva, the bike achieved 14th and 16th places at the 2012 Qatar Grand Prix before they switched from the twin spar aluminum FTR chassis to the mixed carbon fiber and aluminum Inmotech, possibly for the material benefits, and possibly to be able to say that the bike was an entirely Spanish effort. Ignore the engine. The one race run of the BQR FTR did yield 2 points from Hernandez's 14th place finish, enough for 11th in the 2012 constructor standings, and the first manufacturer to officially score points on the list. Number 24. APR. Huntington Beach, California-based Attack Performance Racing was granted CRT wildcard entries for both American rounds in 2012. Richard Stanboli would do most of the work himself, and would design an aluminum chassis around a heavily modified Kawasaki X10R engine. Steve Rapp would become the oldest rider to debut in the MotoGP era at age 41 riding the machine. Despite a failure to qualify at Laguna Seca, the team arrived in the next round in Indianapolis with high hopes. Rapp would qualify this time around, qualifying one spot ahead of the BCL of Aaron Yates in 21st and finishing 14th out of 16, securing 2 points and official Constructors' Championship classification for the team. APR separates itself from the manufacturers below it on the list because they actually rode in multiple seasons. They were granted wildcards at the 3 American rounds in 2013, and between seasons would work on the Mark II, making adjustments to the bike's ECU, namely separating traction control and the anti-wheeling systems, addressing chatter issues, and changing the engine firing order in order to get the bike in better shape. Steve Rapp had retired from racing, so 2-time American Superbike runner-up Blake Young was brought in instead. While the team did one-up BCL Motorsports at COTA by qualifying, they did so in dead last, and the finish was the same, 21st of 21 finishers. Laguna Seca a few months later was even worse. A nasty Turn 5 crash in practice damaged the bike beyond repair, and the team was forced to withdraw from the weekend. The team's final MotoGP race would come in Indianapolis when the bike blew up on lap 1, ending the APR story in MotoGP. Number 23. Ilmor. Ilmor is the first true blue MotoGP prototype manufacturer on the list, and the fact that they're below so many other CRT bikes should tell you all you need to know. Originally founded in 1983, the British company aspired to build kart engines for the noble cause of pissing off their former boss. Mario Ilian and Paul Morgan would find great success. A partnership with Chevrolet netted 5 consecutive Indy 500 wins, and a later partnership with Mercedes saw them supply McLaren's F1 team with engines that would win 2 drivers' titles and 1 constructors' title. After so much 4-wheeled success, Ilmor decided to break into 2-wheeled racing in 2006, creating the Ilmor X3, an 800cc V4 machine intended to begin racing full-time in 2007 with the introduction of the 800cc formula. The engine was designed primarily by Mario Ilian, Ilmor co-founder, based on Formula 1 knowledge, with the chassis being outsourced to Eskel Suter in a CRT before CRT move. Australian Gary McCoy would test the bike for the final 2 rounds of the 2006 season, and finish 15th both times, scoring the first points ever given to an 800cc machine, as well as Ilmor's only ever points. Yeah, things didn't go as planned. McCoy was given the boot for 2007, and Andrew Pitt and Jeremy McWilliams were given full-time rides instead. McWilliams would fail to start the opening race in Qatar with a broken leg, and his teammate Andrew Pitt would retire with technical problems. Not a great start, but still better than what happened next. Before the second round, Ilian announced that Ilmor would be taking a break from MotoGP due to a lack of funding, a fact which came as a shock to Dorna, MotoGP, as well as Ilmor's riders. Ilmor insisted that they would continue to develop their V4, but they never made a full return. They did crash and burn pretty hard, and they did leave literally everyone who ever rode for them out to dry somehow. However, unlike the manufacturers below them, they did develop their own Grand Prix engine, which did actually score points. Number 22. IOTA. The IOTA Racing project entered as a claiming rules team in 2012 with their own in-house chassis, the TR003, and an Aprilia RSV4 engine, fielding a rookie Danilo Petrucci on the bike. The bike wasn't great. Petrucci consistently complained of a lack of top speed, sometimes being 50 kilometers an hour behind the leaders. Coupled with 4 technical retirements, the bike was scrapped midway through the season in favor of a Suter machine. However, when Petrucci made the bike work, he found decent results, with his best result being 11th place in Assen. The team finished 9th in the constructors' standings, only ahead of wildcard CRT machines and behind their own IOTA Suter machine that only ran for 6 rounds. Number 21. Moriwaki. Another case of CRT before CRT, meet Moriwaki. Mamoru Moriwaki was a rider and tuner who studied under the legendary Pops Yoshimura, and also later married his daughter. More relevant to this story, he founded Moriwaki Engineering in 1973, and they would go on to play a small but noteworthy role in motorcycle development over the next 30 years. Moriwaki would develop the first ever aluminum frames for large capacity motorcycles, and would eventually develop a close relationship with Honda, and they would become the very first outside manufacturer allowed to use their RC211V engine, creating their own bike powered by the engine, which they called the MD211F. Better known as the Moriwaki Dream Fighter. The dream in question being to compete with and win against factory teams in MotoGP. They would run 2 wildcards in 2003 with Tamaki Serizawa, who would finish 19th in the Japanese Grand Prix and 18th in the Pacific Grand Prix. The team was signed as a development team for tire manufacturer Dunlop in 2004, and they would run 5 wildcard entries. 3 of those with Andrew Pitt, who scored the team's first points and a 14th place finish in Catalonia, as well as finishing 17th and 16th in Italy and the Czech Republic respectively. Olivier Jacques would ride the final 2 rounds in Japan and Valencia. In Japan, he would find the team's best finish, 11th place of 15 finishers, coming from 21st on the grid in a race of attrition. Moriwaki had always intended to eventually field a full season's effort in MotoGP, but the Dream Fighter would only make 2 more appearances in Grand Prix racing. Toru Ukawa rode the bike to 15th in a wet Chinese Grand Prix, and Naoki Matsudo retired in Japan in 2005. Moriwaki was CRT before CRT. However, they did manage to create a reliable Grand Prix machine that scored points in a third of its outings while not racing against a field of other CRT bikes. That's pretty commendable in the early MotoGP era. Also, their bike had a really cool name. Number 20. FTR Honda. In 2012, Gresini Honda partnered with chassis maker FTR to run one of their 2 bikes in the CRT class's debut season, an effort which we'll discuss later. However, FTR had used their official name that year running Kawasaki engines with other teams. As such, the Honda CBR 1000R engine in the Gresini bike forced the bike to be entered under the name FTR Honda, and they signed Australian rider Brian Starring for his MotoGP debut. Unfortunately, Starring is probably best known for being the other rider to be black flagged in Phillip Island that season. Starring didn't find the points all year long, with the exception of a single 14th place in Catalonia after making it to the end of a race of attrition in hot weather. Unlike many of the wildcard entries below them, the FTR Honda was at the very least a reliable bike. They only had 4 retirements during a full season of racing, and only one of those was technical. Despite one lousy season where they came last in the constructors' standings, they're the first team on the list to actually complete a full season of MotoGP racing. Number 19. Avintia. In 2014, BQR Racing changed its name to Avintia, and they decided to make their own bike in-house for the first year of the Open class, 2014. The Open class is different from the CRT class because one of them was called the Open class and one wasn't. Jokes aside, there are other differences, but they're not really important for the purpose of this video. The Avintia GP14, despite having the Avintia name, was as best as I can tell actually built by the Akira Racing Corporation, with some input from Kawasaki, as by this time Avintia were the last ones using their engines on the grid. Well, they wouldn't be for long. Hector Barbera and Mike DiMeglio wouldn't do particularly well, with Barbera only securing 2 points across the 13 rounds and DiMeglio only managing 4. In the end, Ducati would end up supplying an open class bike for Barbera, which would immediately see him improve to consistent point scoring. Meanwhile, DiMeglio finished the year with the Avintia GP14, scoring a total of 9 points and finishing last among the full-time riders. The next year, both riders would be full-time on the open class Ducatis, leaving Avintia's only campaign as a constructor, with them in dead last in the constructor standings. But they did field 2 bikes for a full season and scored some points. Number 18. Paul Bird Motorsport. Paul Bird Motorsport, or PBM, is a motorsports team that enters itself into a variety of disciplines but primarily focuses on motorcycle racing. They are one of the most successful teams across disciplines ever, with 9 BSB titles to their name and having competed heavily in Grand Prix racing, superbike racing, and road racing. When the CRT rules gave PBM a door into MotoGP in 2012, rest assured that they took it. They used the ART GP12 for their 2012 season, but in 2013 would triple their efforts, giving Yanni Hernandez the ART machine while also producing a PBM machine called the 01 for Michael Laverty, with help from British chassis maker GPMS. Yanni Hernandez found more success with the ART bike than Laverty ever did on the first PBM, with the British rider only finding the points once in the first 14 rounds of the season. Midway through the season, Hernandez would serve as a replacement rider for Ben Spies aboard a Ducati, and the team would play musical chairs, with Michael Laverty being shuffled onto the ART machine, which didn't go to plan, and Australian rider Damien Cudlin being given the PBM. And he failed to score any more points, leaving PBM in 8th in the Constructors' Championship with just 3 points on the season. The following season, both riders would be on the in-house PBM machines. Laverty was returning, but Brock Parks would take the other seat. The two found generally better results than the year prior. Each rider only had 2 retirements and they both scored 9 points that season, with 2 weekends yielding points for both riders. The best finish belonged to Parks, 11th in Assen. While I'm sure the atmosphere on the team was incredible, those double points weekends actually hurt the team overall, relegating the team to 6th in the constructors' standings, just 2 points below ART. However, scoring points and fielding bikes across multiple seasons in MotoGP is an accomplishment that no one below them has managed yet. Number 17. Harris WCM. At the very beginning of this video, we discussed the Harris WCM team and how they were forced to use 2-stroke bikes after their initial attempt at a 4-stroke was banned by the FIM. Well, despite multiple appeals and another ban at the Spanish Grand Prix, Harris WCM did eventually manage to produce a bike that the FIM felt could be called a prototype, and it would race from 2003 Portugal Grand Prix onwards. This went quite poorly. 0 points and mostly retirements on the 2003 season relegated the Harris team to a state of non-classification that year. Harris WCM's 2004 season was a fractured mess of a year. The team would start the year with Michel Fabrizio and Chris Burns. Burns would continue to struggle as he had the previous year, failing to qualify for his first outing of the year at Jerez after he broke his thumb in the rainy conditions, and never scoring a single point for the duration of the season. Burns would suffer damage to his wrist in the British Grand Prix, and wouldn't return until the final round in Valencia, another retirement. During this period, Burns would be replaced by fellow Brit James Ellison, who would do marginally better, keeping the bike on 2 wheels and even securing a 13th place finish in Qatar. In an era with 12 factory bikes on the grid, not bad at all. Burns' teammate Fabrizio had a much better showing during his rookie season. He was consistently fighting near the back of the points, scoring in nearly half of the races, with by far his and the team's best performance coming in Jerez, where he finished in 10th place despite crashing in the torrential rain. Fabrizio would get the opportunity to serve as replacement rider for Shane Byrne at Aprilia, and during his ride in Portugal would crash out of the race. When he was set to return to WCM, he found that his ride had been taken by Yuichi Yui, two-time 125cc vice champion. Yui scored a single point and failed to qualify at one race. 2003 Harris rider Jose David de Gea also made a single appearance that year, crashing out. So what did Harris actually accomplish during this fractured and messy 2004 campaign? Well, Fabrizio finished in 22nd place on the season with 8 points, above only 2 full-time riders: Curtis Roberts, who was suffering mechanicals at nearly every race, and his own teammate Chris Burns. The 5 riders together netted 12 Constructors' Championship points, enough to barely put them ahead of Moriwaki, who only competed at 5 rounds that year. However, they are the first team on the list to actually field a full prototype with their own engine for an entire season. And if you believe team principal Peter Clifford, they did something that no other manufacturer did in 2004. They didn't suffer a single mechanical failure. I mean, that's what he says. I can't say for sure why Chris Burns retired in France, but if we take him at his word, it wasn't mechanical. Either way, Harris WCM really did make their own bike. Yes, parts were based on some other factory's production machines, but the real truth of it is that the bikes that did end up racing were considered prototypes. This was well before the CRT era, and unlike the other independent factories at the time, they actually made their own engine and successfully competed in 3 different seasons with the bikes. Although one was under a different name, which we'll discuss right now. Number 16. Blada. When the bike you didn't make is more famous than the bike you did, that's probably not the sign of a team that left a strong impression on the sport. Blada as we know it in real life is actually just a continuation of the Harris WCM effort we just discussed. In the middle of their fractured 2004 season, they realized they needed something drastic, and as such, found a new partner. Czech mini bike manufacturer Blada, who were coming off of 2 40cc European titles. The two agreed to work together to create a MotoGP machine. This MotoGP bike was to be different than anything else on the grid. Looking around, there were some unsuccessful 3-cylinder bikes, some moderately successful 4-cylinder bikes, and the utterly dominant 5-cylinder RC211V. Of course, you can see the trend here. The only logical move was to do one better than Honda, and create a 6-cylinder bike themselves. And so the V6 Blada was born, and it turned out to be a little too tall of a task. Blada failed to produce the bike at multiple deadlines, and allegedly no engine was ever even tested, with only a single prototype bike ever being made. Unsurprisingly, the blame for this failure falls onto different shoulders depending on who you ask. According to Pavel Blada, who ran the Czech company, he had originally wanted to make a 125cc 2-stroke machine, but was persuaded by WCM to create a MotoGP bike. However, when MotoGP journalist David Emmett asked Peter Clifford about the same thing in 2009, he was told that WCM had come to Blada with a concrete plan to create a V6 using pre-existing technology, which the Czech firm rejected and insisted on forging ahead with their own ideas. Ideas that never worked out. Well, whatever the case was, the mythical Blada V6 never appeared, and despite Blada being listed as the sole constructor, the Blada WCM team ran modified versions of the existing WCM bike, with riders Franco Battaglini and James Ellison waiting on a magical V6 that would never arrive. It was later reported that WCM took legal action against Blada for failure to uphold their contract, and of course the two ceased partnership at the end of that season. During the season itself, Battaglini and Ellison competed at every round, and they were the lowest finishing full-time riders, even finishing the season below 2 Honda test riders. They each scored 7 points. Sadly, 2 of these performances were at the same round, meaning the team only netted 13. Surprisingly, this was still enough for 5th of 7 in the Constructors' Championship, although calling the 2 below them competitors may be dishonest. Exactly how much Blada contributed to the WCM machines in 2005 is up for debate, and despite them being listed as the sole constructor for this year, I feel that might be a little generous. I struggled with whether or not I should separate them from WCM in the standings, and if we added 2005 to the Harris WCM resume, it would bump them up a couple of spots on the list. But with the bikes being run under a completely different name on official results sheets, it's a little hard to do that. Sadly, this campaign spelled the end for Harris WCM and MotoGP. They tried getting KTM to support them in 2006, but in the end that fell through. And the following season, the team was done, ending the saga of one of the more serious privateer manufacturer attempts in modern MotoGP history. Number 15. Suter. Forward Racing made its MotoGP debut in 2009 as the Hayate Racing team, running a single factory Kawasaki as the team's final full prototype entry. In 2012, they returned in time to join the CRT craze, and they would become a CRT and open class mainstay, using 3 different machines over their time in the Premier class. The Suter bike was the first. In 2012, they used a Suter chassis and BMW S1000R engine to compete with American rider Colin Edwards. The bike's debut was a success, with Edwards finishing as top CRT and 12th overall, over 10 seconds ahead of the next best CRT machine. This form would not continue, and in the 3rd round of the season, Edwards broke his collarbone into 5 pieces. Thankfully, as reported by the Los Angeles Times, Edwards kept his fans updated on Twitter. This was news 13 years ago. Edwards had 3 more non-points finishes after his return, before matching his debut performance with 12th place in Germany. After this, his season would go much better. He suffered 3 more retirements, but only 1 more finish outside the points, finishing his season with 27 points, securing 7th in the Constructors' Championship for Suter. Suter wouldn't make any more appearances in the top class after this, but would continue its efforts making chassis for Moto2, where it found most of its success. Number 14. BQR. BQR, also known as Bicarosa No Racing, despite changing their name to Avintia Racing, was infamous in 2012 for running 3 different machines with a grand total of 8 riders. One of these was the one-off Inmotech wildcard, as we briefly discussed earlier, and the other was the FTR chassis that they used for a single round at the start of the year with no success. After this, the team switched to the Inmotech chassis itself. Of course, having only raced the FTR chassis for a single Grand Prix, the move was likely motivated by external factors, namely that both Avintia Racing and Inmotech wanted to market themselves as an all-Spanish MotoGP entry. Again, just ignore the thing that makes the bike go. Well, as it turns out, there's a reason why everyone else was using aluminum, and despite BQR completely dropping FTR from its manufacturer name, only Ivan Silva actually made the switch, and soon after would switch back anyway. Despite only lasting a single season, the BQR entry would be ridden by 5 different riders. The team's main riders were Yanni Hernandez and Ivan Silva. Silva found the points in half of his finishes. Unfortunately, he only found the finish line 2/3 of the time, finishing his season with 12 points and only contributing to the Constructors' Championship 3 times. With 6 rounds left in the season, the team announced he would be stepping down as a full-time rider, replaced by David Salom, who scored 1 point in 2 races before Silva was quickly reinstated, and he only finished 1 of the 4 remaining Grands Prix. Hernandez, on the other hand, was somewhat more successful. Despite missing 2 rounds with a broken collarbone, he'd more than doubled Silva's points during the season. Like his teammate, he retired often, but he managed to score points in all but a single finish, with the best finish of 9th in Indianapolis. In the end, BQR finished 6th in the Constructors' standings and 3rd in the CRT standings with 35 points. Number 13. Iota Suter. Well, after Iota Racing used their own TR003 for the first 12 rounds of the 2012 MotoGP season, rider Danilo Petrucci had had enough, and the team switched to a Suter chassis and BMW engine, marking the birth of the Iota Suter machine. Petrucci found the points in his first outing with the machine. 3 races later, he tied his season best, and in the final race of the season, he found the top 10 for the first time. In half the races, he doubled his points total on the Iota machine, bringing Iota Suter to 8th in the Constructors' Championship and 5th CRT. Obviously, they stuck with the Iota Suter for 2013, and they expanded the garage for Lucas Peszek alongside Petrucci. Peszek had one of the statistical worst years in the modern era, with 11 retirements and 0 points to his name, but that's probably not the fault of the bike when you compare his performance to Petrucci's. Sure, the Italian never cracked the top 10, but he was consistently able to score, securing points in 11 of 18 races and bringing the team to 26 points overall, enough for 7th in the Constructors' standings, 4th CRT. In 2014, Iota Racing moved away from the Iota Suter project, but during their time with the bike, they were able to put together a machine that could consistently find the points for 2 years, at least while it was under Petrucci. Number 12. FTR Kawasaki. FTR Kawasaki was the label given to the bikes run in 2013 by the Forward Racing team, using an FTR aluminum chassis and a Kawasaki Z10R engine tuned up by French tuning house Akira. The bike was ridden by Colin Edwards and Claudio Corti. Corti would fail to find much success in his rookie season, only 5 points finishes with a best of 12. Meanwhile, Edwards adapted fairly well. Despite 2 early crashes, he found his rhythm and would score 42 points on the season with a best finish of 9th in Catalunya. Forward Racing would go in a different direction in 2014, and the team scrapped the FTR Kawasaki project. In their one and only season, FTR Kawasaki was 2nd CRT and 5th overall constructor with 46 points. Number 11. FTR. With MotoGP growing more and more expensive and independent teams being given much less support than they're given now, it only made sense that when the CRT rules came out in 2012, all these independent teams would want to jump aboard and try and find success in this class within a class. One such team was longtime MotoGP runners Gresini, at this time branded as San Carlo Honda Gresini, and they announced their decision to split their garage in 2012. Alvaro Bautista would run a full-strength Honda RC213V, while rookie Michele Pirro would run a CRT entry. Honda initially had some pushback to this idea, but eventually decided they should be open to new things. And so, the Gresini FTR was born. Using an FTR chassis and a CBR 1000RR engine, Michele Pirro would be the highest finishing rookie in the CRT class, and rode the bike to 3rd overall in the CRT class's debut season. He was consistently able to score points, and after making the risky choice of slick tires at the final round of that year in Valencia, his choice paid off, and he rose from 15th to 5th place in the race. He brought in 43 points for the team, enough for 5th in the constructors' standings and 2nd among CRT constructors. The following year in 2013, Gresini ran under the FTR Honda label, which we already discussed, and the FTR label would instead fall to the Avintia Bluesense team, who ran 2 FTR machines with Hiroshi Aoyama and Hector Barbera, this time with Kawasaki-powered engines. The 2 riders fought near the back end of the points for most of the year, with Barbera ultimately coming out the better of the 2, finishing 16th in the standings and 4th CRT, while Aoyama, despite missing 2 rounds, came in 20th and 8th CRT. Ultimately, FTR would finish tied with FTR Kawasaki that season, but lost on countback, meaning they finished 6th in the constructors' standings and 3rd CRT, and that was the end of FTR in MotoGP. Number 10. Forward Yamaha. The final entry for Forward Racing's MotoGP team was by far their most successful. Starting in 2014 with the rebrand to the Open class, the Forward Racing team would run the Forward Yamaha, with YZR M1 engines leased from the factory itself. Colin Edwards would return for a 2nd season with the team, and 2-time CRT champion Aleix Espargaro was brought into the fold. The team had originally planned to continue their partnership with chassis maker FTR, but actually ended up starting the season with a full Yamaha chassis, swing arm, and engine setup, with some other parts still being supplied by FTR. The season started very well, with Aleix Espargaro getting a 4th place on debut, although admittedly he was 8 seconds off the podium. Edwards also scored on debut, but as the season progressed, it became clear Espargaro was a cut above his teammate, with Aleix scoring in every round, while Edwards failed to find the points again until Mugello, where he would debut the team's own proprietary chassis built by, look at that, Harris Performance Products. Edwards would come 15th in this race, but Espargaro had only finished outside the top 10 once on the Yamaha bike, and the next time out in Assen, at his 150th Grand Prix start, he would shock the world. After making Q2, which would start under mixed conditions, he would set the fastest lap by 1.4 seconds before rain began to fall, and giving him pole position, the only one ever for an open class bike. He would fall the 4th in the race, but 4th for an open class bike is still incredible. Meanwhile, Edwards wasn't faring well on the Harris chassis. He would race for the final time at his home round in Indianapolis and was able to finish in 13th, scoring the final points of his Grand Prix career. He would be replaced for the rest of the season by Alex DeAngelis, who would score 14 points in 8 rounds to beat Edwards by 3 points in the season standings. Edwards did fine before he retired, and DeAngelis was good on the bike, but Espargaro was running away with the open class title. And in Aragon, he would shock the world yet again. Espargaro qualified 10th on the grid in Aragon, although he appeared to be held up at the end of Q2. He made the crucial move to be the earliest rider into the pits after the rain started falling. This, coupled with crashes from key riders ahead of him, promoted him to a podium position. And despite a late charge from Cal Crutchlow on the factory Ducati, Espargaro held him off at the line by 17 thousandths of a second, to take the best result by a CRT or open class bike ever. Forward Yamaha finished 4th in the Constructors' Championships and 1st in the open class, with Aleix Espargaro finishing 1st in the open class rider rankings, while securing the only pole and only podium ever by a CRT or open class rider. A wonderfully successful year. The following year was a different story. The landscape was changing, and it had become clear privateer efforts in the open class probably weren't the way of the future. so forward Yamaha would be competing with Ducati and Honda in the open class, and ART was not really a factor. Espargaro did a little too well to stick around with the team for 2015, and with Suzuki making their big return to Grand Prix racing, they signed him, leaving forward with Loris Baz and Stefan Bradl. The team abandoned their in-house chassis, running the Yamaha kit on both bikes once again. The season didn't go as well in 2014, with Baz and Bradl not being able to find points as consistently as Espargaro had. Baz scored points regularly, but always near the bottom end, with Bradl struggling to finish races. Despite a scaphoid injury, Bradl was in talks for a contract extension. However, when team boss Giovanni Cuzzari was arrested on suspicion of corruption, money laundering, and tax evasion, he demanded to leave. These weren't the first shady dealings Cuzzari was involved in either. I said earlier Espargaro had done too well to stick around. Well, that was true, but the fact that he hadn't received his full pay for 2014 until midway through the 2015 season probably didn't help either. Additionally, tensions between the team and Edwards were so high in 2014, partially due to an alleged failure to pay FTR, the chassis maker Edwards had wanted for 2014 to begin with. Bradl was released from his contract, and he would be replaced by Claudio Corti and Tony Elias, with the latter scoring 2 points. Baz would find some success, scoring some more points and finding the team's season high of 4th. In the end, the team finished with 35 points, 6th in the constructors standings, ahead of ART, and just a single point behind the quote-unquote full factory Aprilia effort. Both of their riders finished ahead of every open class Honda, and all but a single open class Ducati, ridden by Hector Barbera. Forward Yamaha disbanded with the end of the open class. But they were unmistakably the powerhouse of the open class era. They blew everyone else out of the water until the actual factories weighed in, and they were the only factory to achieve a pole position and a podium during the CRT or open class eras. Number 9. ART. Well, many of you who are familiar with the CRT and open class aren't particularly surprised. The highest placing CRT and open class bike on this list is the Aprilia Racing Technology or ART entry, a bike that really shouldn't have been a CRT bike to begin with. Aprilia had been absent from the MotoGP grid since 2004, but under the guidance of Gigi Dall'Igna would provide machines to 3 teams for the inaugural CRT season in 2012. These machines would be almost entirely Aprilia efforts, with modified RSV4 engines, in-house aluminum frames, and proprietary Aprilia ECUs and software to match. So it was a factory effort, but made cheap. Naturally, some factories protested their inclusion as a CRT entry, but this was to Dorna's benefit. After all, the CRT class was basically Dorna strong-arming the factories and proving they didn't need them to begin with. So ART were allowed to stay. 4 full-time riders received ART machines in 2012. Paul Bird Motorsports' James Ellison got off to a rough start, but quickly righted the ship and was able to score points very consistently, even finding 2 P9s near the end of the year. Speedmaster's Mattia Piscini was the least successful of the bunch, being sacked halfway through the season after failing to score points in most rounds in favor of Roberto Rolfo. However, far and away the most successful team using the ART bikes was Power Electronics Aspar, fielding Aleix Espargaro and Randy DePugnier. Both riders found consistency aboard the machine and soared to 1st and 2nd in the CRT rider standings. Espargaro in particular only missed out on the top 10 3 times in the back half of the season and only had 2 DNFs all year, netting himself 74 points and top CRT honors. ART would dog-walk the CRT standings, finishing with 100 points, more than double that of closest rival FTR. 2013 was basically just as good. Karel Abraham and Yanni Hernandez would ride the ART in addition to Espargaro and DePugnier returning, and frankly, Espargaro was the only real standout this year, with him finishing as top CRT in all but 3 rounds. DePugnier took a step back, missing points on some occasions and struggling with DNFs, and Hernandez simply couldn't find the point scoring consistency Espargaro had, and the less that we say about Karel Abraham's season, the better. Overall, while the group may have lost some steam, Espargaro was still kicking ass at the top, finishing the season with 93 points, over 50 points clear of the next best CRT rider, and ahead of the full-time Ducati factory rider Andrea Iannone. Thus far, all the CRT nations lived in harmony, but everything changed when the Hondas attacked. In 2014, the new open class Honda was released, and Aspar, Cardion, and Grassini all moved to the new effort, leaving ART with only a single bike, now fielded by Iota Racing. Iota Racing had given up on their Iota Suda project, and the new bike would be ridden by returning rider Danilo Petrucci. Petrucci would suffer a broken wrist on the season, causing him to miss 4 rounds, but was still able to score semi-consistently on the year-old GP13. He finished the season as 5th CRT with 17 points, enough to give ART 2nd CRT in the constructors standings. 2015 was the dying days for both the open class and the ART project. Iota Racing was still running ART's GP13, now fielding Alex DeAngelis, and they would only find 2 points on the season and would finish dead last in the constructors standings. ART never found the highs that forward Yamaha did. They never got that pole position or that podium. but they did dominate the CRT championship during its most diverse years, and were the only manufacturer to enter a bike in all 4 years of the CRT and open class era. But what really elevates them above Forward Yamaha for me is the way they did it. Unlike many of the other teams in this era, who valiantly braved making their own bike only to find little funding or no success as a reward, or the teams that found moderate success by just slapping their name onto someone else's engine and chassis, ART found the most success of the bunch making their own machinery. Frankly, if you wanted to call this a half-assed attempt by Aprilia at a return and put Forward Yamaha ahead of them, I couldn't really blame you. But for this video, I'm looking at every manufacturer and judging how they did, and ART did pretty damn good. Number 8. Team Roberts. Of all the privateer manufacturers to try their hand at MotoGP, Team Roberts was far and away the most successful. Yamaha team manager Kenny Roberts broke away from the firm in 1997, and if you believe Roberts, he was already making most of the parts for his bikes anyway. And he would begin manufacturing his own machines in 1997, beginning with the Modena's KR3, with the goal being to use the lower minimum weight afforded to 3-cylinder bikes, as well as their decreased tire wear, to gain an advantage in late race pace. Well, by the time he was ready to race, tire technology was good enough that it didn't end up mattering. The team would continue to run the 500cc KR3 in 2002 against the 4-strokes, with Jeremy McWilliams even securing a pole position with the machine, and they finished ahead of Aprilia in the constructor standings in 4th. For the 4-stroke era, Proton agreed to work with Team Roberts to make a V5 engine, attempting to mimic Honda's success during the inaugural season of the new era. The bike wasn't quite ready to start the year, so the team started on the KR3, and that's where their best results would come from. The Proton KR5 would be underpowered and slow on debut, but it would still manage to outperform Kawasaki during the season, netting the team 5th in the constructor standings. 2004 would see McWilliams replaced by Roberts' son Curtis, and the less said about this season the better. The Proton project was not working, and for 2005, Team Roberts looked elsewhere for assistance. Enter KTM. Yes, KTM's first ever MotoGP entry was supplying a V4 engine for Team Roberts in 2005, and Shane Byrne would ride it to a single championship point. Just before the Czech Grand Prix, KTM dropped a surprise announcement. No, it wasn't an album. They would be ceasing the supply of engines to Team Roberts immediately, citing that Team Roberts had been requesting more funding from them than they had initially promised, and it was an arrangement they could not keep up. For 2006, they would need to find a new supplier, and they found the best one on the market: Honda. So began the short and beautiful life of the KR211V. Piloted by Kenny Roberts Jr., Roberts' own son and the 2,500cc world champion, this was easily Team Roberts' best effort, and showed just how adept of a bike they could make if given a decent engine. In fact, the chassis used this year was developed by a familiar name: Fabrication Techniques Racing. Kenny Jr. would ride the bike to the front end of the pack all year long, finishing the season 6th in the standings and securing 2 podium finishes, Team Roberts' only podiums. The more notable of the pair being that year's Portuguese Grand Prix. It was the single closest podium in the MotoGP class history, and allegedly, Roberts thought he would have another lap to pass Rossi and Elias. If that was the case, he seemingly had the pace to win. Woulda, shoulda, coulda aside, this was still an incredible showing, and with Honda as an engine partner, the future was bright. The KR211V had beaten Kawasaki and very nearly edged out Suzuki in the constructor standings. For the next year, the partnership continued, and Team Roberts was given the new 800cc RC212V engines. Unfortunately, the 212 wasn't the same as Honda's last few Grand Prix efforts, and Team Roberts' results faded fast as a result, with Kenny Jr. even leaving halfway through the season and passing the reins to his brother Curtis. Sponsorship money faded just as fast. Honda was too busy trying to fix their engine to help Team Roberts, and the team finished with just 14 constructors' points. In the end, unable to attract sponsors, Kenny was forced to pull the team from MotoGP. Initially, the team and Kenny Jr.'s retirement were thought of as only temporary. However, as we know now, both would end up being permanent. Regardless of how it ended, Team Roberts was in a tier of its own as far as privateer efforts go. They secured multiple podiums and a top 6 Riders' Championship finish, and on multiple occasions they outscored full factory constructor efforts. What Kenny and Proton accomplished was incredible, and I found it quite hard to place him above or below the next manufacturer on the list. However, at the end of the day, Team Roberts' best results all came with the outsourced Honda engines, and for me, that was the deciding factor to put them below. Additionally, looking at some sources, the Team Roberts bikes are all listed as different eras, so the Proton KR, the 211, and the 212 are listed as different constructors, but not the KTM for some reason. I don't know. If you want to go by that logic, the Proton KR bike from 2003 up until 2005, I would probably put that right around FTR at 11. The KR211V would honestly probably still be right here. That's how big the gap between ART and the next constructor is. and the 212V is certainly the lowest, probably around WCM and Blada in the 15 to 17 range. Number 7. Kawasaki. Kawasaki is the largest major manufacturer to never really find success in MotoGP. I mean, obviously being this high on the list they found some, but in terms of the household names, they really didn't find as much as the others. Kawasaki had some real hits in the middleweight classes during the earlier eras of Grand Prix motorcycle racing, but they never really found premier class success. When the series moved to 4 strokes, they felt it was finally their time. And after spending 2002 testing parts on their All-Japan road race bikes, along with a single test ride in MotoGP by Akira Yanagawa, which ended in retirement, they entered the MotoGP team for the first time in 2003 with the all-Australian team of Gary McCoy and Andrew Pitt. The season went terribly. Comparing Kawasaki and Ducati's debut seasons in 2003 is night and day. McCoy and Pitt finished the season 22nd and 26th in the standings, with the bike only once cracking the top 10 at a wet race in France. They finished dead last in the constructors' standings. 2004 was a big step forward in performance and looks, at least in my opinion. Alex Hoffman and Shinya Nakano were now the full-time factory duo. Kawasaki improved on basically every front for this season, and despite still lacking top speed, they had a solid bike on their hands. The bike now only failed to score a single time when Alex Hoffman finished 18th in Donington, and Shinya Nakano was able to push the machine to consistent top 10 finishes. The manufacturer went from dead last in 2003 to 4th in 2004, beating out Suzuki, Team Roberts, and Aprilia. 2005 was basically the same exact story. Although Hoffman missing some rounds hampered his performance a bit, he was replaced by Olivier Jacques at some rounds, who in a wet race in China that year would find the best ever finish for Kawasaki. Frankly, he had the pace to catch Rossi and take the win if the race was just a few laps longer. This helped secure Kawasaki's second consecutive 4th place in the constructor standings ahead of Blada. In 2006, Nakano was joined by Randy DePunier, and the bike had seen some serious off-season work that wouldn't really pay off. Both riders consistently scored points, and Nakano was able to find his top 10s again, but he struggled with DNFs in the later half of the season. He did tie Jacques' second place in Assen that year though. Not that many people remember it given how that particular race ended. Kawasaki's struggles in 2006, they believed, were due to team principal Harold Eckel, who had managed the team since its return, and was apparently involved with a competitor's MotoGP effort. Naturally, they sacked him, and they would field Olivier Jacques and Randy DePunier for 2007 on their brand new 800cc bike. DePunier would prove to be the rider of the season, only finishing outside the top 10 once, but struggling with DNFs, while also continuing the now yearly tradition of finding a P2 finish. 2008 should have theoretically been better, but with Honda and Yamaha dialing in their own 800s, Kawasaki was yet again left behind, and the factory efforts were stopped for 2009. Although having already developed the bike and signed Marco Melandri for a contract that year, they gave the bike to Forward Racing, and they ran a single bike semi-factory effort. Melandri would ride the Kawasaki valiantly, only logging 2 DNFs and continuing the second place tradition, finishing the year in 10th and the Constructors' Championship 5th out of 5th. But only 25 points behind Suzuki. Kawasaki never found a Grand Prix win or any real success, but they were able to produce some bikes which were competitive in multiple years. It wasn't a half-assed effort by any means, and frankly I'm really curious what the factory could have done with a truly great rider on their side. Number 6. Aprilia. Aprilia really seemed to just now be coming into their own as a MotoGP manufacturer, although it probably could have happened much earlier were it not for their first couple of attempts being less than successful. As mentioned, they were there for the birth of the 990 class with their RS Cube, which really should have been the RS Cubed, but bringing up the semantics of math pronunciation makes me look like a nerd, so forget I said that. Anyway, the RS Cube was an inline 3 MotoGP engine, with Aprilia apparently ignoring the failures of Kenny Roberts' 3-cylinder and attempting to take advantage of the lower minimum weight afforded to 3-cylinder bikes. Naturally, this didn't work, and it's a bit of a shame since this bike was otherwise very ahead of its time. Ride-by-wire, traction control, and pneumatic valves. Unlike winglets, these are actual things that make a difference on the road, pioneered in racing. Unfortunately, despite the best efforts of Regis Laconi, Jeremy McWilliams, Colin Edwards, Noriyuki Haga, and Shane Byrne, nothing special ever came of it. A new version of the Cube was tested for 2005, but when the company came under new management, the MotoGP program was axed. Aprilia's next effort would be as the Claiming Rules Team ART, something we've already discussed, but they would return with an actual prototype in 2015, although not as a full factory team, instead giving bikes to the independent Grassini Racing running the first RSGPs. They would consistently remain at the bottom of the standings until 2021, when their longtime rider Aleix Espargaro secured their first MotoGP podium, a 3rd place finish at Silverstone. The following year, they finally entered their first full factory effort since 2004, fielding Espargaro and Maverick Vinales. Finally, they found success. Just 3 races into the season, Aleix Espargaro secured his and Aprilia's first ever MotoGP win. Couple that with 8 more podiums between their riders, and they finished 3rd in the Constructors' Championship. They decided not to fix what wasn't broken, and they repeated the same feat with the same team in 2023 and 2024. In 2025, they've revamped their team. With Espargaro retiring and Vinales out the door, they now have defending champion Jorge Martin and Marco Bezzecchi on board. Bezzecchi has already shown promise with the bike, securing a win and 2 podiums as of summer break, and Martin has, well, it's better if we ignore him, to be honest. With the addition of Satellite Team in 2023, now known as Trackhouse Racing, Aprilia has blossomed into a full proper MotoGP contender. And they've amassed 5 wins and 20 podiums at the time of writing. Number 5. KTM. Considering they're the newest manufacturer in MotoGP, KTM has accomplished a lot. No wonder they went broke. In all seriousness, KTM's most impressive feat has been its incredible development program to funnel talent into MotoGP. I mean, seriously, imagine telling someone in 2016 that just 8 years from then, the most promising young prospect of the decade would be riding for KTM in MotoGP. For their first few seasons, Pol Espargaro would serve as the KTM lead rider, finding their first podium in Valencia in 2018. In 2019, longtime Yamaha Satellite Tech 3 found out that orange was the new black and became the KTM Satellite squad. But it wouldn't be until Brad Binder came into the fold in 2020 that they got their first win. And despite Pol Espargaro having his best season with the brand yet in 2020, rising to 5th in the points, it would be Miguel Oliveira suiting up alongside Binder the following year. Over the next few seasons, the two would helm the Austrian racing effort, with Oliveira finding higher highs and ending up with 5 wins, but Binder always being more consistent and finishing higher in the standings, only finding 1 more Grand Prix win, although admittedly it may be among the best of them. It took KTM a few seasons to really get going, but now they have a formidable, if not difficult to ride, machine on their hands. It's the fastest bike of all time and has led to 7 Grand Prix wins and 31 podiums, 5th in both categories. They finished in admittedly a distant 2nd in the constructors' standings in 2023 and 2024, thanks to the efforts of Binder, Miller, and Acosta, and despite financial troubles in 2024, seem to have secured a future in MotoGP, hopefully with great results to come soon. Number 4. Suzuki. Suzuki is the best of the rest when it comes to manufacturers. With the top 3 firmly in their own class, Suzuki represents the most successful of the other major manufacturers to give MotoGP a shot. This fan favorite has been there since the beginning, well, when they feel like being there, that is. Suzuki was present in the first season of MotoGP in 2002, and their 4-stroke bike didn't particularly work out as the result of indecision within the company about whether they should run a 2-stroke or a 4-stroke for 2002. Despite this, test rider Akira Rio used his home field advantage to get a podium in the very first MotoGP race, and 2,500cc world champion Kenny Roberts Jr. would find another one later that year, finishing the first season 3rd in the constructors' standings, tied for their best ever. Unfortunately, progress would stagnate. They would only find 2 more podiums between 2003 and 2007. With the advent of the 800cc class, some factories struggled, but Suzuki didn't really lose that much ground. As a result, John Hopkins and Chris Vermeulen would take the GSVR to 4th and 6th in the World Championship respectively, with Vermeulen finding the first win for the factory in France that year. Hopkins was replaced by an aging Caparossi in 2008, and the two found 3 podiums and not much else. After 3 more seasons of failing to find anything and struggling in the global recession, Suzuki pulled the plug on their MotoGP program. That is, until 2015, when they returned with a brand new nicotine-free bike, fielding future Aprilia stars Maverick Vinales and Aleix Espargaro. Vinales would find the first win for the new GSX-RR in 2016, and then promptly left. After a couple rough years, Suzuki found their lineup: Alex Rins and Joan Mir, and in the modern era these two would give the brand their best years, with Joan Mir taking the 2020 Riders' Championship along the way, and the two of them bringing the mark to a total of 8 wins and 53 podiums. Much more than respectable. However, after 2022, Suzuki again pulled the plug on their racing division. Historically though, they never stay away for long. Number 3. Yamaha. Okay, I know, don't bring out the pitchforks yet. Let me explain myself. I had a lot of trouble picking between Yamaha and Ducati for number 2 and 3. Spoilers for the rest of the list, like you couldn't already figure it out. In the end, I gave the edge to Ducati. We'll talk about that in a second, but first let's go over Yamaha. Yamaha is in a different league than the previously discussed constructors on the list. One quick look at their stats will tell you that. 125 wins and 365 podiums. 5 constructors and 8 riders titles. We are clearly in different air here than we were previously. These numbers are second to just one other manufacturer. Let's take a brief walk through their history in MotoGP. Yamaha has been immensely successful in Grand Prix racing as a whole, but come the MotoGP era, they had some trouble getting up and running. The first M1 was a carbureted 942cc machine that basically just used their YZR 500 chassis. Max Biaggi secured the factory's first wins that season somehow, being the only non-Honda winner. 2003 was much of the same, and this time the bike failed to score any wins, and the factory finished third behind Ducati in their debut season in the constructor standings. 2004 was the big overhaul Yamaha needed. The bike had some serious changes, but it was also the rider, Valentino Rossi, who helped bring them their first rider's title. Rossi had to ride the wheels off that thing to get it where it needed to be though, and with the next highest Yamaha in 7th, any hope of a constructor's title to match the rider's one was out the window. Rossi repeated his rider's title, and with Superbike world champion Colin Edwards by his side, they finally took the constructor's title as well. Yamaha spent 2006 improving their software, and after a hotly contested season, just barely failed the repeat of their championships. The 800 era would be by far their best. Famously, Ducati would dominate the first season of the formula with ease, but once Jorge Lorenzo arrived at Yamaha in 2008 and the brand made some changes, chief among them being a change to pneumatic valves, Yamaha had the closest thing to a dynasty they've had in the 4-stroke era. 3 straight riders and constructors titles, something nobody up until that point had accomplished on a MotoGP bike. Unfortunately for Yamaha, after Rossi left in 2011, they failed to capitalize on the end of the 800 or the start of the 1000 era, and despite winning another rider's title, they wouldn't win another constructor's title until 2015. In 2016, MotoGP underwent a major change, homologated software and a brand new tire supplier. Yamaha particularly struggled with Michelin's front slicks. From here, Yamaha would begin a downward spiral. 2020 was their best chance at a constructor's title, and they finished with the best results, but unfortunately a scandal where they used some non-homologated engine parts gave them a 50-point penalty and handed the title to Ducati instead. Fabio Quartararo pulled out an incredible 2021 Riders' Championship, but he's just one man, and the next highest Yamaha finished that season in 10th, although admittedly he did only ride half the season with them. Yamaha have struggled most in the past couple of years. They haven't scored a single win since 2022 and have perpetually in the lowest concessions tier, although new development projects are thankfully showing their ongoing commitment to the sport, and hopefully the 2027 regulations and a move to a V4 engine can help revitalize what used to be a perennial contender. And that's what they are, a perennial contender. They have always consistently been one of the best manufacturers on the grid, but they've never really had an extended period where they were the best, where everyone felt the need to go after them and chase them. And really their only dominant era, you could point to them having the best rider lineup on the grid at the time. Don't get me wrong, they're an amazing factory. They're second in almost every metric, and if this was a list of all Grand Prix and all time, Yamaha would still be here while Ducati was barely scraping the top 10. However, it's not. So let's move on and talk about who's above them. Number 2. Ducati. The Bologna brand that has shocked the world over the past few years by taking down the Japanese titans of motorcycle racing. After finding some great success in superbikes, Ducati made the switch to MotoGP in 2003 in the second season of 4-stroke competition, and immediately found success with their V4 Desmodromic valve-powered Desmo Sedici. Loris Capirossi scored the first podium for the factory in its very first race, and the first win came just 5 rounds later. For a few years, Ducati was perpetually a force to be reckoned with over a weekend, but never for a full championship season. That is until everything aligned in 2007. Casey Stoner, Bridgestone tires, and the brand new 800cc formula meant Ducati sent the world on fire and won their very first Riders and Constructors Championships in the same season. They wouldn't match this success for a long time. Stoner, Rossi, and Hayden all came and went, but none could bring the ultimate success. Ducati had been perpetually third in the Constructors' Championship since 2009, ahead of Suzuki when they were there, but trailing behind Yamaha and Honda. In 2013, 2 critical additions to Ducati's future were made: general manager Luigi Dall'Igna and future superstar Andrea Dovizioso. Davi would go on to be the most important Ducati rider since Stoner, but it was Dall'Igna who turned the ship around, immediately introducing radical changes, and having been on the other side of the CRT barrier with ART, he called Dorna's bluff and attempted to enter the Ducati as a CRT machine. This led to the restructuring of the CRT into the open class. Ducati also benefited from the Specchi electronics in 2016 being based on their own, and Dall'Igna has generally pushed for more and more electronic development, with Ducati often leading the field in that regard. It wasn't until 2020 when Ducati won a constructor's title again, although this was by sheer force of numbers, as by the time Ducati had 6 full-time riders on the grid, more than any other manufacturer. They haven't given up a constructor's title since, and haven't given up a Riders' Championship since 2022, with 2 for Bagnaia and 1 for Martin, and another one seeming practically assured this year. So why did I put Ducati above Yamaha? Well, it's pretty simple. No manufacturer in the MotoGP era has had an era of dominance like Ducati has had since 2020. Their numbers right now do trail Yamaha by a bit. 116 wins compared to 125, and only 340 podiums compared to Yamaha's 365. With that being said, they have not only won the last 5 Constructors title in a row and look to be wrapping up number 6 fairly soon, something no other factory in the MotoGP era has done, but they have also consistently led innovation and have been the benchmark for teams in the electronics and aero era. The way that other manufacturers have had to consistently copy and chase Ducati year after year is something that no other manufacturer can really say in the MotoGP era so far. I hate ride height devices as much as the next person, but they are undoubtedly one of, if not the single biggest innovation in the MotoGP era. With Delinia pioneering electronics, aero, ride height, these bikes would have turned into spaceships sooner or later, but Ducati sure did have a hell of a lot to do with accelerating that process, and along the way churned out some of the most dominant Grand Prix bikes in history year after year after year. Ducati will surpass Yamaha in total constructors points in a matter of just a few races. Given until the end of 2026, I'm confident that Yamaha's podium record will be passed as well. With all that being said, they're still not even close to being number one. Number 1. Honda. Unless your MotoGP knowledge is limited to the last 5 seasons of racing, you aren't surprised. In the MotoGP era alone, Honda has 12 Constructors Championships, 10 Riders Championships, 158 wins, and 440 podiums to their name. All of those are records. Honda dominated near the end of the 2-stroke era, and with the Big Bang V5 RC211V, they started the 4-stroke era much the same way. And Honda would dominate the first year of the new series, winning 14 of 16 races and coming in second in 2 others. They swept the Riders and Constructors titles, a feat they would repeat with Valentino Rossi the following year, winning all but 1 race this time around, and securing their second Constructors Championship by an even wider margin this time. Even after Rossi left for Yamaha, Honda was still left with an all-star team of riders across their factory and 2 satellite teams at the end of the season. Riders 2 through 6 in the standings were Gibernau, Biaggi, Barros, Edwards, and Tamada, all on Hondas. They would lose the Riders title, but they took their 3rd consecutive Constructors. 2005 would see Honda make minimal changes to their already successful machine, and as such they would lose out for the first time to Yamaha. 2006, however, was a year many manufacturers had written off as the last year of the dying 990cc formula. Naturally, Honda decided to stretch their large pockets and completely revise the 211 for just a single year, fielding riders Nicky Hayden and a rookie Dani Pedrosa. The former would take the title after a hard-fought series, and at least one Honda was on the podium at every round, and the Constructors title was theirs once more. The dawn of the 800cc era arrived, and as I've alluded to, Honda had some trouble. They had made the bike much too small and focused too much on raw power output with their new V4 engine. They would finish runner-up to Ducati in 2007 before coming 3rd in the championship in 2008. 3rd place was their lowest result in the Constructors Championship since 1993. 2009 and 2010 came and went with no titles in any category, and minimal race wins or drastic development measures taken. For 2011, Honda threw everything and the kitchen sink, also known as a brand new seamless transmission, at the 212V. Hayden had left and was replaced by Casey Stoner, the very rider who had beaten them in 2007, and Stoner himself would bring glory to Honda in the 800cc era. For the dawn of the 1000s, Honda had some wonderful weapons at its disposal. At the time, they were the only team with 2 Alien Quartet members and the brand new RC213V. Together, Stoner and Pedrosa took 12 of the 18 wins that season, sealing the Constructors Championship. However, Jorge Lorenzo won the other 6 races himself and finished P2 in 10 more. He was undeniably the Riders' champion. 2013 saw the biggest development Honda would make in the modern era, signing Marc Marquez. Under Marquez and Dani Pedrosa, the RC213V would become the dominant bike of the 2010s. Honda would win the Constructors title in every remaining year in the decade, minus 2015, with the Riders title to boot. This brought their totals to 12 Constructors and 10 Riders titles, dwarfing even Yamaha and Ducati. Honda had spent the 2010s building a bike around the best talent on the grid. Marc could ride around problems that few others could, and as a consequence, when Marc got injured in 2020, they got exposed for their laziness. Now, this is a drastic oversimplification of Honda's downfall. I could, and others have, made entire videos about it in itself, but over the past few years, we have all seen Honda absolutely floundering. They have a terrible bike, and at times, they were either unwilling or unable to take the developmental steps necessary to catch up. With the 2027 regulations on the horizon, many are expecting the factory will return to their former glory, but whether or not they do, don't let the recent failures fool you. It will be a very long time before any constructor is able to take the #1 spot away from Honda. Again, these are mostly just my opinions. If you have a different opinion, I would love to hear it. Put your list down below. Thank you very much for watching, and a special thank you to my channel members: MBP2112, Venturian CRO, Sean, Motosapien B, Jack the World's Fastest Maori, Drew Gibbs, Really Very Bored 1, Carl Ruppersberg, Schmalutin, Troy the Boy, and Money Penny, as well as new channel members ASX91 and Luis Campos. One final thank you to everyone for watching, and have a fantastic day.